Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige. Welcome to Life After Scientology. I have a good friend of mine here today, Dave Richards. Dave.
Hi.
And we're going to go over a few things, and hopefully you'll be more informed at the end of this program than you were when we started. There's two things I want to cover here, and the first one is the subject of disconnection, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. You've watched Leah's show and many others people speak about Scientology and their way of disconnecting families and brothers and sisters and breaking them up. And David, your daughter Megan is disconnected from you, isn't that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Why don't you give us just a little background on how this happened and tell us a little bit about Megan? Just, start from the beginning.
Well, Megan was born in 1978, 2 days after my 30th birthday. At the time, I was in the C organization, or as we will refer to it, the Sea Org,
right,
which is the senior organization in Scientology, which manages the entirety of Scientology.
Okay.
And the spiritual mecca, if you will, is the Flagland base in Clearwater, Florida. And I was working there. And when Megan was born, and so Megan was born into Scientology, if you will.
I got it.
But to give you a little background on disconnection, so it's better understood, disconnection is really a practice of, it's exactly what the words means. If it's your mother, you don't talk to her, you don't take her phone calls, you don't take texts, you don't send her emails, and you don't receive any from her. That's what you do.
Wonderful. The church, huh?
Yeah. And it originated in the mid-'60s with the idea that L. Ron Hubbard generated an idea, and that idea was that there are people who are suppressive. He said 2.5% of the population are suppressive people. Now, that's not so stretchy. Today, mental health professionals call those people sociopaths, and they say about 3 or 4% of the population is made up of sociopaths.
Right.
So he wasn't that far off the wall.
So wait a minute. Do we want to get a little bit into what they mean by a suppressive person, or no? You want to?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, go on.
It's a person fundamentally who has no conscience, who acts on self for and by themselves. They're not interested in promoting the well-being of others.
I got it.
Quite, in fact, they're promoting the well-being of themselves at the expense of others, right?
Yes. So
the idea at that time was Scientology was under a degree of attack, sometimes from mental health professionals, and so they were as a collective group were considered to be suppressives.
I got it.
And also, anybody who was antagonistic to Scientology, the idea there was that if you were doing courses or training or auditing, which is counseling in Scientology, that you needed to rid yourself of the influence of quote, suppressive people. So that whole body of originated in the mid-'60s. And one other thing went with it, and that was the idea of fair game. And that is anybody declared as suppressive could be harmed in any way, in or outside the bounds of law. And as a Scientologist, you would not be held guilty of anything. Now, you might go to jail, but and so that was the concept. Now,
wait, just a second.
Mm-hmm.
I heard, as a matter of fact, I know that fair game was canceled at one time, but there was a little bit of a rejoinder there. What was the saying? You didn't say it because it was bad PR, but you practiced it?
That's exactly
okay.
Right. Yeah.
Well, for the audience, I want you to know that. I mean, I knew that,
Yeah, but there's never been any change in the way that, well, I take that back. It's at a period in time, the idea, particularly of your mom being declared a suppressive, was toned down a bit. However, in more recently, that the idea has been cranked up. And so, for example, my daughter was somewhat in communication with me and my wife until recently when she went to Oregon. and got more involved with Delphi. And then the police arm of the church,
OSA.
OSA, took her to California for 2 weeks to indoctrinate her on how bad her mother and I were, and what a bad influence we could be.
Right. Meanwhile, I know for a fact, because of you being a friend and you telling me this, didn't you support them when they got out of Scientology?
We supported her and her husband, her before she met her husband, and her and her husband while they were in Scientology.
Jesus.
And I mean, we bought them 4 cars. I paid insurance on those vehicles for years. My wife was even more of a contributor than I was. I would say she's given them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years.
But she's a suppressive.
I'll
I'll take a suppressive like that anytime for a friend.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, you need suppressives like that.
Go on.
So, well, recently, Megan has completely disconnected from her mother, and had earlier on disconnected from me. And it got so bad that recently her husband is a writer of fiction.
Right.
My wife tried to buy 2 books from his blog, his website.
Right.
And he discerned that it was her and gave her money back. I mean, again, the church uses disconnection not so much with respect to assisting an individual Scientologist, but with respect to having political control. If you control a person, it is the last time this happened in modern civilization was probably Germany in the 1940s. If you control somebody to the degree that they're afraid, they're genuinely afraid. I mean, if you ask my daughter and you were private with my daughter, which as little as a year ago, my sisters went to visit her.
Yeah.
And she told them, I know my dad's not an SP.
Yeah.
But I know my mom's not an SP. But again, this is a political tool. It's the political arm of the church, the organization of.
It's the clout they hold over a person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because many Scientologists, in and out of the, whether they're on staff or they're just practicing out as public, it's called public individuals. They're not on staff. Are dependent upon their relationships with other Scientologists.
Of course they are.
The minute that you step outside of that strict regimen, your job can be damaged.
Well, my daughter Lori is disconnected from me. And if she hadn't disconnected from me when I first escaped, she would have lost her job the next day. That's it. She worked for a Scientology employer. It would have been it. My daughter, Denise, if she hadn't disconnected, her daughter who's in the Sea Org would never talk to her again.
Yeah.
So it's clout, it's coercion. It's just, go on, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
and it generates, I think, in many cases, to give you an example, my daughter's husband is named Garrett Robinson.
Right.
And Garrett has a blog. And on that blog recently, his father passed away recently. And he went into how valuable your parents are, how they mold you, how they make you, and he attributed. Now, that's about as tone deaf as you can get, given that his wife cannot talk. Now, if he says his wife is a wonderful person, how did she get to be a wonderful person being raised by a pack of wolves or SPs?
I know.
Yeah. Well, so, well, you know my daughter, Ron.
I know Megan. I remember when she was a little girl, and we were both living in Miami at the time, and we went to the zoo. And I remember she was that little, you were carrying her, and we went over to this one particular little stall, and there was parrots in there. And you looked at it and you said, Ron, look at all the fucking parrots. And there was nobody there at that time. But then with about 30 seconds, a whole crowd of people come up, and Megan says, "Yeah, look at all the fucking parrots." And all the people arrived at that point, and we didn't know what the hell to do, you know. She was just Paul parroting what you said, though, you know.
Yeah.
But lovely girl, too. And I knew her when she was in the Sea Org working at Celebrity Center. And that's it. You have no relationship with her now.
Yeah.
The product of Scientology, huh?
Exactly. What happened was, and it's worse than that, because what happened, the reason Megan was in the Sea organization, the Sea Org.
Right.
She got pregnant. They tried to convince her that she should terminate the pregnancy, but she was, and I'll give her this, she's a wonderful mom.
Yeah.
She has 3 children. The last time I saw 2 of those children was at least 10 years ago.
Jesus
These are my
Christ.
grandchildren.
Yeah.
The third one I've never seen.
Yeah.
Because he was born after I was disconnected from.
Wow.
And yeah, so this is the practice. And Megan was in the Sea organization for 12 years. Her and her husband came out, and it's very difficult to transition from a cloistered life.
I know.
You can speak to that better than anybody.
I was on staff for 26 and a half years, and I know the people that I worked with, most of them don't have any exchangeable job skills that they could leave the Sea Org and go out and get a job. You know, what are they going to get a job at? Hollering at somebody? I mean, this is one thing that goes place. Look, when you're in a constrained area that way with a lot of people, you act differently than when you have the freedom of living in planet Earth as a regular person would live. You know that.
Yes.
I use this example. If you had 20 rats and they had to live in a telephone booth, they'd be at each other's throat all the time. Take those same rats and take them to an area where they're living on 100 acres. They'd probably take up knitting. I mean, they'd be a different animal. And I know that people act differently in the Sea Org than they do once they get out. And I myself was more combative when I was in than out now. I'm a little more tolerant. I'm not tolerant of the shit that the church does, because I feel that I have a duty to tell how they are, because we're going to go into this next, and we're going to talk about the entrance of Scientology when you first get in, but the valuable things you can get, which is not the case now. And well, we want to finish off with Megan first, and I want you to get into that, because you were in a position of being a commanding officer at one point. I kind of lost the point I was going to make there about job skills. Well, job skills, you know. There's okay. I made the point. So
my now ex-wife and I had to help them in the transition from the Sea organization to life in the real world, if you will. And we did help them, and we all, you know, I mean, that was what we did. And yet I'm sure they've been offered Sophie's choice. You either disconnect or we'll ruin your life. It's that simple.
Yeah.
The church is a vicious, destructive cult. They shouldn't even be able to use the word church, because they're not like any church you've ever been in.
No, I know that. I mean, look at, I know you get interrogated in the church. They have microphones, they have video cameras. You go to confession, so to speak. And then if you leave, well, they'll use any of that stuff against you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised a Catholic, and I tell the story about my priest who I used to go to confession with in Pennsylvania. I was raised in a coal mining area of Pennsylvania. And we had a priest who was from Poland, Father Zdanevich. He understood about 1/2 of what you said. So you'd go to confession and you'd give your sins. And then at the end, he would say, "That's a nice, say 5 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys." And I'd walk out and I'd feel good. I feel I'm a fresh start. You know, I'm going to try to be a better kid next week. You know, there was some relief in it. And they didn't have a digital camera in there or a voice recorder. That was the end of it. That is not so with the Church of Scientology. And they will try to ruin your life.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Well, look what they did with your daughter and you.
Yeah.
It's okay. Go on. I'm not sorry. I wanted to make that point. But
yeah. No. But I think that's pretty much sums it up. You know.
Okay. So let's cover this next part. And those of you watching this, if you want to follow this episode, these episodes rather, I think it'd be a good idea, because I'm going to go into some things that maybe you don't know about or you wouldn't find out about unless I brought them up. And one of the things, as a matter of fact, I talk about it in my book, and that's the book I've written. In case you don't have it, I recommend reading it. It's called Rootless: Scientology, My Son David Miscavige, and Me. And by the way, that song that you heard when the program was starting is one of the songs off an album I did, and I talk about it in the book, in 1974. I'll go into that in a later episode, how that was done. I had a lot of fun doing it. But I talk about in the book the worthwhile things that you could do when you first got in Scientology. And I wanted you to talk about this because I know you headed up a very booming organization in Washington, D.C. back in the 70s. And why don't you give us a little, as a matter of fact, you were the commanding officer, weren't you, Dave?
Yes, I was, yeah.
Give us an insight into that.
Well, I got into Scientology in 1970 in Canada, believe it or not. And I did a course that we all did in those days. It was called the Communications Course, or for short, the COM course.
Remember it.
Right? Much of the essence of that may have been pulled from other ologies.
Yeah.
It's certainly one of the foundations of communication is the ability to be there comfortably.
Yeah.
And that was called TR0. And
wait, TR meaning training routine zero.
Thank
you.
We
don't want to give people misunderstood words here.
All right. So, and it's very similar to meditation.
Yep.
You learn techniques of how to be comfortable in your own skin, if you will.
Right.
Very, very valuable. I mean, it's used in other, like I said, other ologies to this day.
Yeah.
So circumstances evolved, and in 1971, I went to Washington, D.C. April of 1971, and I joined staff. So I wasn't in the Sea Org per se. I was in staff at the sort of the next level below the Sea Org.
Right.
I had come, by the way, from a mission, which is the next level below an organization. So that you've got organizations with authority to deliver certain services.
How does the hierarchy go? Just explain that a second. Like what's the ground level one called?
The lowest level one would be called a group. It'd be just people that maybe they were taking the principles of Dianetics,
right,
modern science of mental health, and auditing, counseling each other with the Dianetic techniques. And that would be a loose kind of group. Next to that is more formally a mission. A mission has to be commissioned by the church.
Okay.
It has levels, lower levels. Next to that is what's called today it's called a Class 5 organization. And that delivers pretty much everything up to the more esoteric levels. And then you get into the higher organizations, Flag Land-Based being one of them, Flag. Yeah. You sometimes hear the word advanced org.
Yeah.
Those deliver what are called, I don't want to get into too much detail, but they're the more esoteric.
Right.
So I did some administrative training not long after I got there, and due to circumstances, I was made the commanding officer of Washington, D.C. in the spring of 1972 by L. Ron Hubbard.
Wow.
And one of the first programs, which were basically evaluations of organizations and a management bureau, was set up with the first one was set up, making me the commanding officer of Washington, D.C.
Got it.
I was pretty inexperienced, but I was a pretty bright guy.
Yeah.
And the makeup of the organization was interesting. Remember, this is 1971. The 60s has just gone by. The world of free thinking, Timothy Leary, the transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
So people were much more attuned to seeking something. And I would say the makeup of the people in the organization was by and large people who had either had a degree or had left university, many of them, to explore Scientology.
Right.
And in fact, there were 3 guys of interest that came from Villanova University.
I remember you telling me about them.
And one of them is, to this day, David Miscavige's right-hand man. His name is Greg Wilhelm.
I know Greg, yeah.
And when I knew him, he was a very spiritual person,
yeah,
a very seeking person. I understand he's been turned into
he's a
group.
One of the things he does, he goes after people who blow. He tries to get them back. But him and Marion Power are the ones that came looking for me.
That's right.
And then you got Sam Licciardi, right?
Yeah.
You know, Sam Licciardi was married to my daughter Denise for a while.
I did know that. Yeah.
And the daughter that they produced is in the Sea Org now. That's Tara.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So in D.C., the organization grew quite rapidly. And I will say that we had a lot of skilled people, a lot of intelligent people. And what we did were a large number of things. We had, for example, a book group that went out and sold about 200 paperback books. And we would then follow up with those people. So we would start somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 of those communication courses, the basic courses, every week. Now, many organizations to this day don't do 50 in a month, and some not even in a year.
Yeah.
And we, at our peak in the mid 74, 75, we delivered over 1,000 hours of auditing.
Auditing meaning?
Counseling.
Now, just for you guys out there listening to this is not a puff piece on Scientology, but I want you to know how it was in those days. Free thinker, free spirits. I remember when I went in, it was kind of laissez-faire. You enjoyed yourself. You gained skills you could go out and demonstrate in life. In other words, they were delivering services that you actually gained abilities to be more competent in life. This is necessary for you to understand this, because this entire thing did a volte-face, an about-face, to what it is today. It's a cult disguised as a religion, operating as a business. In those days, there was some value to this.
Absolutely.
Anyway, continue on. I wanted to make that point.
Yeah, so we had, other than the communications course, the higher level courses, we had 200 people actively on those courses. We, like I said, we would have 1,000+ hours. Well, I'll give you best example I could give you. On the weekends, which were our most obviously active time, we would start at least 50 auditors and 50 pre-clears, as they're called, or people who are working their way to.
Or they're receiving auditing.
They're receiving auditing,
yeah.
Right. They're receiving counseling. And they were auditing or counseling was delivered in 12.5-hour blocks. So you could do the math pretty quickly. 50 times 12.5 is
750, about that, I guess.
Something in that neighborhood. And then that's just on the weekend. You had the week, you had who
delivers that these days? I wonder if anybody.
Nobody does.
I remember, well, of course, remember Dennis Dubin, a dear friend of both of ours, who's died recently. No, not recently, but he died. And Dennis and I got into Scientology the same day.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, at Cherry Hill Mission in New Jersey. And I remember he came in with the cape. And he used to get down on the train to get auditing down in D.C. on a train from Philly. He'd wear driving gloves and a cape, Great guy. He loved duck, Peking duck.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'd meet him, he'd have a duck sitting on the seat in his car, eating it with his hands, These were characters, but they're real free thinkers, though, too. Anyway, go on, continue. I just want to give a little color to that.
So I would say we probably had about 135 staff. Our income was adequate to pay staff. So, and we also supplemented. We rented some buildings, and we allowed staff to stay there at no charge. We took Well, the first thing L. Ron Hubbard said,
Christ.
let me tell you the
This is
first thing.
beneficial to the people who are working for
Yeah.
you.
The first thing L. Ron Hubbard said to me, he said, learn to care for people.
Yeah.
And I learned that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a principle, a core principle of being a manager. And
Yeah.
I was a manager, and I had a lot of people that worked for me, obviously. And but there was a spirit of fun, a spirit of
Yeah.
play. People were learning things they didn't know. That it was not authoritative, totalitarian as it is today. I went back to the Flag Land Base in 2006, I think. I was completely amazed at the Vault Vis, the way people were treated. In fact, I spoke out about that to
Yeah.
those people. I said, "Well, did you guys not learn that your job? You work for me. I don't work for you." And they were astonished.
Yeah. It's different cat.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think that by and large, people, well, not by and large, I mean, most certainly they were there because they wanted to be there.
Yeah.
And now Washington, D.C., because of our unique administrative practices, we had people from all over. We had people from the little mission that I started in Canada. And
Was that in Athabasca?
Edmonton.
In Edmonton. Okay. Yeah.
And we would train them so they could go back to those missions and make them prosper. And it was a time of growth, a time of enthusiasm.
Yeah. It is not what it is today.
No.
This because I'm doing this for a purpose. I want you to be more informed by watching these episodes. So kind of bear with me when we go through this stuff. It's going to be worth your hearing about. And then once you get all this under your belt, you're going to be more informed, not only about Scientology, but about cults in general, and about life in general, and about people, and about the sociopath. So I'm glad I got you on this, Dave, because this is important for people to know, I think. Because I talk about it in the book. I said it was wonderful when I started, and it changed. So go on.
Yeah. So I think that if you look at what was going on then, well, of course, none of the esoteric levels. We'll get into what those are and define those later, maybe in later episodes. I don't want to get too specific, but we were delivering things that people found useful in their lives, that generated success in their lives. That it was a community. People would come there to the organization. There were various activities that we had, things as simple as Sunday services.
Yeah.
But it was a hub of a community of people, and we all at the same time we resurrected. Remember, because Washington D.C. was the founding Church of Scientology.
I know that.
So there were a bunch of people who had worked with, been lectured to by L. Ron Hubbard. So we had those files, and we set about resurrecting those people, letting them know that we were here, we were practicing.
And you were delivering things that people could benefit from right then. You weren't giving them promises of something that you could never deliver. And that's important.
Yes.
Because in my book, and again, that's the book, I talk about what the church could do if they wanted to save themselves, or in other words, keep practicing. There's three things. Number one, give a general amnesty, forgive everybody of anything. The crap will hit the fan, but if you keep on going, it'll be over it. Number two, immediately stop disconnection. And number three, only deliver services that will fulfill what you promise. Now, if they were to do those three things, I said that there's a chance that they might be able to survive. But I will put the odds at them doing that as the same odds as if a pelican come in this room right now and start playing a jazz saxophone. As a matter of fact, I would put more odds on the pelican than I would the church. But I wanted to bring it up that the possibility does exist if they did these things. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because you were delivering a lot of valuable skills. Well, you're not delivering the skills, but you were making people more able in life with what you were doing. Did you have anything more to say on that?
No, I think I pretty much covered it, Ron.
And yeah, I don't want to go over what we already went over. In other words, I think if I made the point, that's good. And I do want to mention that if you want to go to my website, it's called therealronmiscavige.com. Again, that's therealronmiscavige.com. Again, that's, it reminds me of a joke. My friend told me, Jerry Fermi said, Ronnie, when I was a kid, I swallowed a phonograph needle, but it didn't affect me. Just simple shit. The other thing I do is I'm a musician, and we have fun when I'm playing, because at the end of the gig, I'll say to the people, listen, if you enjoyed what I did tonight, tell the owner, please. If you didn't enjoy it, just keep it to yourself if you don't mind. So please continue to watch these, and I will try to get you informed on a lot of things that maybe you weren't informed on, and you'll feel better about life and maybe be more effective by knowing these things. If you don't have my book, go out and buy a copy, because I'm going to be referring to this throughout these episodes. And well, you don't have to buy it, but I'd love if you would, because I think it's very informative. So until the next time, I'm Ron Miscavige. This is David Richards. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Hey,
and this is Life After Scientology. I'll see you on the next episode.